Okay, can everybody see it? Yeah.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here today, especially the new faces. We're especially excited to be presenting in front of you all today. So here we have our findings from the interviews we conducted on the Spirit of Wonder project. Each subsection of our findings is specifically located on the country of origin of our participants. And now we will introduce ourselves individually.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fiza Shahid. I'm currently a sophomore here at BU. I'm part of the College of Arts and Science, and I'm a political science major.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimia Kian. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences, majoring in environmental policy and minoring in business.
Hello, I'm Megan Crimmins. I'm a junior at Boston University with a dual major in environmental policy and international relations, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
Hi, my name is Emily. I'm a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences at BU. I'm studying Earth and Environmental Science, and my pronouns are she, her, hers.
And I'm Nicholas Moulis, so I go by Nick. I'm originally from Hyde Park, Massachusetts, which is a neighborhood of Boston, and I'm in the Questrom School of Business studying finance with a cross concentration in real estate.
So in keeping with the Spirit of Wonder goals, we conducted 5 interviews of different individuals, all with unique experiences as international students. From these interviews, we wanted to find out their biggest challenges, accomplishments, and any difficulties or barriers they've overcome while being in a new country. And it was really enlightening because we all learned everything, really new stuff about each interviewee. So while we were going along and doing the interviews, and even after when we were coding, we try to keep in mind what are the most common themes in all 5 interviews, why are these themes the most prevalent, and what do these themes tell us about the realities of studying abroad and its impact on the students. So our target audience for the interviewees, especially during COVID when we had a couple of restraints on us, we try to focus on students from BU because it was the most idealistic. They're all aged between 18 and 21. And also picking students from BU was really beneficial because we wanted to see if BU specifically plays a role and how these interviewees reflect back on their experiences abroad. So in this section, we're all going to go through and introduce our 5 interviewees and talk a little bit about their journeys.
So I interviewed A1. She's a freshman at Boston University studying from Istanbul, Turkey, and she's been studying in the United States since her freshman year of high school. She originally came to the US freshman year of high school and studied in Connecticut and then moved to New York and is now at BU. She grew up with kind of an obsession with American culture, and that kind of led to her decision to come to the US. Her decision to come for high school was more of her decision versus for college was partly her parents' decision and partly was just how she was always raised with this ideal that she would be studying in the US. Currently, she's studying for a psychology degree, but this has the potential to change to either computer science or something in the medical field. And right now she wants to be a lawyer.
So a little bit about my interviewee, A2. She is currently a sophomore student here at BU. She's originally from Hershey, Pennsylvania, and actually went to study abroad in Austria during high school. She returned back to the United States sometime in her senior year. And her decision to go abroad, there were several factors involved, but the biggest one was that everyone in her family has gone abroad. They actually went to Germany. She was the first one to go somewhere else. And all throughout her life, ever since she was younger, her family's been hosting international students at their house. So she loves hearing about different cultures, meeting new people, hearing new languages. It's a big passion of hers. And that's also why she's pursuing political science here. And she's hoping to go into law, something maybe that'll allow her to travel a little bit more.
So I interviewed A3. A3 is a sophomore at Boston University, and she's originally from Madrid, Spain. She has been studying in the US since her freshman year of college, and she has dual citizenship in the US and Spain. She's always had strong ties to the US because her parents actually met here in grad school, and then they moved back to Spain, and her family would often visit the US throughout her childhood, so she really wanted to study abroad, and her parents really supported her in that decision to go to the US. And she also traveled a lot as a child, so that kind of gave her the drive to pursue study abroad, and she also wants to pursue a career helping people across the world.
A4 is a sophomore here at Boston University from Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. He's a student in the Questrom School of Business, concentrating in finance, and he has experience coming to the United States as he has family in Tampa Bay and has visited them frequently, and really enjoys studying in Boston and especially enjoys his major.
And finally, I interviewed A5. She is a junior here at Boston University, and she's originally from Amman, Jordan. She's in the Party School of Global Studies, studying IR and getting a minor in religion. And so she actually spent her early life in the United States up until she was around 10 years old. And then she moved to Amman, Jordan, where all her family is now. And she holds citizenship in both countries. And she goes back to Amman often as her family lives there, and that's where she currently is right now for this semester.
So next we're going to go into the 5 themes that we identified that were common between our interviewees. The first one that we're going to talk about is early life, and Nick will talk about this.
So to start off on the early life theme, I'm going to read the quote that's in the middle. A1 was quoted saying, "I grew up in Istanbul, which is very much a city, but I grew up out in the suburban area of Istanbul, and everyone looked the same. Everyone looked exactly like me." So what we found was, although there are very many different backgrounds, the participants shared similar experiences. People came from many different places around the world and had many different and similar experiences in their early lives in the way they grew up and where they grew up. A3 said, "I grew up in Madrid, Spain, in a big city with lots of activities and things to do and a lot of cultural immersion programs." A1 said she grew up in Istanbul, which is also a big city like Madrid, and she grew up in the suburban area of Istanbul where everyone looked the same. Both of these participants grew up in big cities where they were very similar to the people they grew up with. And while there were many similarities, we must highlight the differences in them. While A1, A3, and A4 all grew up in big cities, participants A2 and A5 grew up in small farm towns. A5 grew up where most of the residents of her town were not similar to her, whereas A1, which we covered earlier, grew up in a big city where everyone seemed to look like her.
So the next theme that we'll cover is COVID-19 and politics and how this both affected the interviewees in their home countries and with being in the US. This initial quote that I'll start out with is A1, and it's her talking about how she felt like she got more hate and like she was less safe after the election of Donald Trump. Some of our findings, there are differences in how the interviewees were treated after Donald Trump's election. Students said that they faced more hate, as you saw with A1's quote, and students also talked about how they were fearful to either speak in different languages or to be identified as international students, depending on what people they were around. Additionally, there were some issues with visas and COVID restrictions and being able to come this year. So while all of our interviewees were able to come, there were friends who couldn't come because even though they got into school here, they couldn't get visas to come here. And then finally, there was a lot of differences with how COVID affected students' lives and how it affected their lives either home or coming here. A lot of countries had different restrictions than the US did. And so when they came from their countries and then came here, there was a big adjustment period to what they were able to do or not able to do. Some quotes that we have from the interviews that represent this theme. The first one is A3 talking about how she is worried about speaking Spanish depending on where she is and if she's around Trump supporters. A5 talks about how in Jordan they were under martial law for the months at the beginning of coronavirus, and that they could get arrested, fined, or jailed if they violated the lockdown or curfew, which is very different from the restrictions in the US. And then A1 talked about how she already had a visa to come here because she was here for high school, but that a lot of her friends who got into college here weren't able to come because they couldn't get visas because of COVID-19.
So in this section, me and Kimmy are going to talk about how our interviewees adjusted to a different country and some of the culture shock they may have experienced. So to set the tone for this section, I'm going to read this quote. Yeah, sometimes I get very self-conscious in how I talk or the things I say and how others perceive me. So I think in part that's why I'm very cautious in opening up and I'm very shy. So A1 talks about how when she first came here from Turkey that America had like a really strong sense of individualism. And in Turkey, they don't really have individualism and freedoms growing up. So it was a really strange adjustment for her. And then A2 talks about how when she went from here in the US to Austria, that she had some difficulty making friends. Everyone there wasn't particularly friendly towards her. And because of the language barrier, she had a really tough time making relationships in the start of it. So that made it really difficult for her, but she eventually did get through it. A2 also talks about how when she went to go live over there, the host family, particularly the kids, weren't happy that she was there. So that caused some drama and actually led to her switching host families. A5 talks about how Palestine is very different than here in America. So when she talks, she kind of feels like she's threatened. She doesn't like people hearing her accent and revealing her identity. It kind of makes her scared. And then A3 talks about BU's role in international students adjusting specifically. She says that how BU kind of groups international students together into one big identity rather than accentuating their differences and kind of talking about their individual countries and characteristics and traits about them that make them unique and special. And now I'm going to pass it on to Kimmy for the findings.
Thank you, Fiza. So some findings we had for this theme of culture shock was just overall that despite our interviewees coming from all different backgrounds, different locations, different experiences, they all felt some level of difficulty when either coming to America or in one of our interviewees' case, leaving and just adjusting to their new environment. So some strong areas of culture shock that we found they experienced, like Fiza mentioned, was the strong individualism in America because for where a lot of these interviewees come from, like Europe or the Middle East, those just aren't really like super strong sentiments that kind of like drive daily life. Whereas in America, that's super big here in individual freedoms, which especially gets highlighted like during this pandemic, which would definitely be shocking to a lot of these people who are not used to that. In addition, making friends was quite difficult for many of our interviewees, given the language barrier, given that they just looked different, sounded different, had different accents, and unfortunately it resulted in some of them even being like made fun of or bullied. And then they also had some difficulties adjusting to life with host families and got into some conflicts, and some of our interviewees even had to switch host families. In addition, a couple of our interviewees noted that BU's role in kind of like international students adjusting was a bit interesting because they noted BU doesn't do a really good job of like assigning individuality to international students, but rather they kind of feel like BU just groups them all under the same umbrella instead of highlighting their uniquenesses and seeing them as unique. So some of our interviewees noted that them and other international students could definitely benefit from having activities and programs that were meant for bringing different international students together. But overall, Despite all this, our interviewees eventually were able to adapt, and they were all happier in the end because of their experience.
So this is the last theme we'll discuss, which is push and pull factors, kind of why international students decided to study abroad in the US. And so I'll highlight this first quote. So A3 kind of discusses how university in her home country in Spain was not the best, but she knew she wanted to come to the United States, and her parents were very supportive of that because they also studied in the US and they really appreciated US education. We'll also see some differences that will come up in how parents and families support these international students. So we found, like I just said, for a lot of students that came abroad in our interviews, they felt that there were more opportunities abroad, that the education here is better, also that overall conditions in their home countries was worse than in the US. But again, there are also similarities and differences in the decision to go abroad. Some interviewees were encouraged by their parents to go abroad, and they felt that it would be best for their students to pursue education here. One interviewee in particular had hesitant parents. They were worried that she would be unsafe and alone. And one interviewee took it upon themselves completely to go abroad. They kind of really wanted to go abroad, and their parents didn't help them as much in that decision. And an interesting finding was that most of the interviewees traveled a lot growing up, and one interviewee in particular said that this made the decision to go abroad more plausible. So that is an interesting find. Maybe that kind of plays a factor into how interviewees decide to go abroad if they have experiences in new countries. So now I'll talk about some memorable quotes. A1 discusses how she always knew she wanted to go to college outside of Turkey because her parents wanted her to learn the language, and also she was really obsessed with American culture and the American dream. And A4 discusses how the conditions at home were as good, and that there was a hurricane in Puerto Rico in 2017, so that really was the final factor that made him decide to go abroad. And then this is A5, whose parents were hesitant about her going abroad because they didn't want her to be alone, and they were concerned about her adjusting to the US. So that was an interesting contrast to other interviewees and their parents. And again, one interview describes how traveling growing up made the decision to study abroad easier. She felt really independent and felt comfortable going to different cities she had never been to before.
To conclude, we found that there are a lot of common themes between interviewees, such as their early life, such as their response to COVID-19 and their experiences here at Boston University, as well as having individual different experiences based on where they came from, also based on what they found when they got to Boston University, and what they studied and what they got into and the friends they made. International students should also be viewed as individuals and not be put under the common umbrella as international students. Every international student has a very different background, has a very different life. It should not be categorized just by one term. And also I want to note that this project as a whole for us was really meaningful, not only with what we came to, the conclusions we came to, but also how we did it. The fact that we're in the midst of a global pandemic and we together were able to interview people who came from all over the world via Zoom and also be presenting to a group of people who are also all over the world is something that's truly wonderful, pun intended, and shows the progress that humanity has made, not only in how we view cultures and how we learn about other cultures, but also technologically, and really has us excited for the future of what we can be able to do. Thank you all for listening, and now we're open to any questions you might have.
Splendid. Don't forget your reaction options, guys. You can send them a congratulations. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Very enjoyable. I'll ask my panel if they had any questions that came up. And I'll ask you to mute yourself if you're not intending to be having us hear all the background behind you. Dr. Lee?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I probably have to leave early, but before I do, I want to ask a team a question. How do you ensure interviewees, especially when you ask political or personal questions, that they do not answer in a way that they expect you? you to hear, but really answer questions of their own true thoughts.
Yeah, so I can speak on this one when it comes to politics. Within our interviews, we didn't have necessarily questions that were specifically guided towards political answers, but when we asked about people's experiences within the US, this is a common theme that we saw that came up when people talked about it without us even having to guide them that way. When it comes to COVID, we did ask some questions around COVID-19, but it was pretty open-ended and more just like, what has your overall experience been?
If I could add to that, there's a research study by the Pew Research Center about the shy Trumper theory, and it basically just says that conservatives and Trump supporters were less likely to admit that they're Trump supporters, but it's because they feel that people are being hostile toward their personal views. So we made a point to be really open and accepting and not make it feel like we resented anyone based off their political beliefs.
Great, thank you.
Very thoughtful, very careful questioning, and certainly it's important to create that sense of openness. And some of the political contexts around the world create more freedom and flexibility, and so that's why that's such an important question that Dr. Chen asked. Checking around to see if any of my other panelists have a question. Checking for my own question. I have one question. Oh, Ari, I noticed you're unmuted. I'll let you go first, please.
Thank you. It was a simple question. I wanted to know if there were any resources you all wish you would have had to kind of make this process easier, or if like, how did you feel about the process? That's my question.
I feel like the process itself wasn't too difficult. A good resource would have been, I guess, more of like an easier way to find participants, because a lot of it was just us having to think of who we knew or common connections between people and ask around, hey, would you mind spending 10 minutes or so on an interview with us? It would have been good, I guess, to have just like a sort of, like collective database, I guess, to pick from and be able to just quickly send out an email to someone would have the time and be willing to participate. But in the end, we didn't have a problem. We got the participants and we really enjoyed speaking with them and interviewing them, and we learned a lot too.
Very
Going
helpful
off of
suggestion.
that, oh, sorry.
Please. No, go right ahead.
I also think that if there was like the time and resources to do a deeper dig into it, it would have been interesting to be able to pick BU students from either like certain organizations or within certain fields and see how that might affect their experience as international students as well.
Excellent ideas. I love it. Anyone else that we're missing? My question was, did finding out that sort of the individual treatment or the collective treatment of internationals caused them to feel sort of isolated and not really well felt or connected with individually, did it lead you to think about any entrepreneurial opportunity to support that, to sort of solve that problem, to speak to that problem? Any ideas come up that would be like, this would be a good solution for that problem? And maybe not.
I can't, nothing like entrepreneurial is coming to mind right now, I guess. But I think that one thing that was mentioned a good amount was that the interviewees kind of wish that there were more resources at BU in order to kind of like connect with other international students and just like, find people more similar to them and stuff like that. And that's not to say that, there's not clubs and things for specific cultures and countries, because those definitely exist and there's ways to get involved with those and to kind of meet people who are from the same place as you through that. But just kind of like an overall thing for international students to be able to connect with one another, that could potentially be something that would make them a bit better acclimated to being in a new environment right off the bat when they first get here and feel a little bit isolated. So that's kind of what I got from the interviewees.
Excellent, excellent. That's helpful, Kimmy. One of my other students, he's a senior now, actually, that's his very focus right now. He's creating an app actually for that very purpose. So I can tell you more about that if you're interested offline. Fiza, did you have your hand up there, please?
Yeah, I was just going to add to Kimmy's. The only thing I can think of sort of entrepreneurial is maybe create a lounge for international students. maybe if there's space in like the George Sherman Union, but BU is also constantly building new buildings and new spaces. So maybe like a nice facility for international students to have and go to where they can meet others from all like over the world. It would be kind of cool.
Wonderful idea. Thank you. Brandon saying the Howard Thurman Center opened up this year, but COVID. Yes, that's true. That's true. Hopefully when the world reopens, we'll be able to respond to some of these things. So just double checking, any of our other panelists have a question or a curiosity or anything that they needed to know about? I think I've asked my question. That was really rich and really enjoyable. Thank you very much for sharing. One thing that I particularly enjoyed was seeing how when you did your quotes, you highlighted the words that were like most important. It really made them pop out. I just really liked being able to really quickly sort of see the critical insights that I should draw from each of the quotes. So I did find that to be very helpful approach to making sure we could quickly digest all that interesting information. Last call, any of my panelists have a comment or question, just unmute yourself and I'll see that hopefully and dive right in. All right. Then if not, Dr. Benke, I turn it over to you in case there's anything else before we go to a break.
All right. No, I think this is probably a good stopping point for just a brief 5-minute break, and then for people to stretch or get a glass of water, and then we'll start back up again. I'll just say that the first two groups did just a phenomenal job. So I really enjoyed watching these. And we'll certainly have time to talk later in the class period as well. But until then, let's all refresh. We'll be back here at 3:40 for the final two presentations. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.